thank you so much for taking the time to come on and talk with us about this.
Of course. Sorry, I'm just kind of getting.
Jeffrey, are you tired of talking about showgirls at this point?
No, I'm not at all. Obviously, I'll talk to anybody about showgirls. But yeah,
can anyone ever talk about showgirls enough to like get bored with it? Like that seems impossible.
It's definitely been an intense 2 weeks, I guess, just back to back. But it's good. Everyone's excited about it, so I'm excited.
It sort of proves the thesis of the documentary that everyone's like, "Oh my God, you want to talk about showgirls?"
Exactly.
On a personal note, so my sister, I'm on vacation with my family. We were all tired of beaches.
Oh, Brian.
What, Bill?
Oh my.
Yes, I know exactly where this is going.
Well, no, so my sister constantly jokes every time we're on vacation together and I'm about to do a podcast. She's like, "Can I be on the podcast?" And I'm like, "I don't know, Lauren. Have you seen this obscure film from the Czech Republic?" She's like, "No." But so today, I'm like, I had to watch this documentary about the making and then like the critical reception and everything of Showgirls. And she flipped her shit. She was like, "I love Showgirls." And I'm like, "You've never seen Showgirls." And then her husband says, "No, she's seen it like 10 times because it's on Bravo or E all the time."
Oh, funny.
And then
Yeah.
She would just started rattling off like, and this is, my sister cannot remember if she has seen a movie or read a book, but she started rattling off scenes and was just super excited about the fact that there existed a documentary about showgirls to give her another avenue to think about.
That's awesome. Yeah, it is. There are certain people that I feel like that are kind of like no-brainers when, if you're like, "Oh, okay, I just assume that this person has seen Showgirls and will get it." But then there's, every once in a while you kind of stumble upon that kind of random person that you would never think like loves the movie, and you're like, "Really?" Like that happened with my younger cousins. I was like, are we really talking about the same movie? You've seen this? Like, she's like, "No, I love it." And I was like, "Okay, great."
Yeah, because I did the whole like, you meant striptease or flash?
Yeah.
No, she really meant Showgirls. It was kind of incredible.
You meant Dream Girls, right?
No, striptease.
So to that end, I guess, to kind of kick us off, like, what was your first time watching Showgirls? Like, what was that experience like?
I was in Chicago. It was about 10 years after it had first come out, so it was definitely late. I was living in Chicago at the time, going to film school, and I was just hanging out with a friend one night in his apartment, and Showgirls came up, and he was very offended that I hadn't seen it, and so he walked over to his DVD shelf, popped it off the wall, and put it in the DVD player, and just instantaneously my mind was just blown. It was like, I think I had a very similar experience that a lot of the people who I spoke with for the movie had, where it's just like, and I'm sure everybody, like the first 5 minutes, your mind is blown, and you're like, "Is this the movie? The whole movie's gonna be like this." Like, where like she changes the radio station with a switchblade knife, and I am just along for the ride. So I had been a fan ever since.
Yeah, I think she yells at 3 different people within those first 5 minutes.
Yeah, so. It's and then there's 2 car crashes, vomiting. She, fortune won, fortune lost. Those first 5 minutes are just pure insanity.
Yeah, and so Bill, since you just spoke, what was your first time watching Showgirls like? Like, did you have a similar? I feel like everyone gets initiated into this movie.
You're talking about me?
So what was your first time watching like?
2 days ago.
Oh my God!
Whoa!
Yeah.
You're like,
oh wow,
on the first time experience.
Absolutely, as fresh as it comes. Yeah. And wow. So yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience because I had heard all of these different things about this movie, about the fact that it was hot garbage and all of these other kind of takes on it. It's funny, we had Adam Naiman, and so while I was watching the documentary, I was just like, I recognize that voice, and then it was like Adam Naiman. I was like, oh, hey, I know him.
Yeah, he defended Domino for us, Jeffrey.
But
I love that. Adam's great.
So yeah. I had heard all of these things about the film, and I hadn't heard how aggressively bad Nomi's character just kind of seems to be throughout all of this movie, and yet everything that she kind of wants to happen happens to her or for her, which is surprising because most of the time when you have shithead people in the film, they often get, they don't get the outcomes that they're searching for. And so she was just, I didn't realize how much she was going to be swimming up a creek, and she does it the entire film.
Yeah. What was it? David Schmader's line, the baffling charisma of Nomi Malone, and that is just perfect. Everybody just kind of wants to bend over backwards for, to help her pursue her dreams. And yeah, it's
like if there was a porcupine that people just couldn't help but want to touch.
Exactly.
And not even touch like the right way, not with the quills. No, everybody's petting it against the quills. Yeah.
All right, so Bill, you watched it 2 days ago. That's insanity. Michael Snydell, what about yourself? What was your first time with this movie like?
Oh, I have a deep, deep love for this movie. So I've been extremely excited that we've been talking about this. So I came to this early high school. And kind of my main friend group were kind of obsessed with it even by the first time I watched it with them, which was like sophomore year of high school. And they definitely had a, like something more akin to a relationship like The Room with it at first, but it was also something that we found to be such an amazing object. Like, I mean, like, I can't tell you how many times my friends have said, I got towels. Like, I have heard that so many times. But what I'll say is, in the 15 years since then, I've either lost my mind or seen the light and think this is like almost a brilliant movie. I've also, I am also like a huge defender of Verhoeven. Elle from a few years ago was my favorite movie of that year. All of the American films, besides maybe Hollow Man, I'm a big fan of. And so when Adam and when Adam and Jeffrey Scott's, is that how you say his name? Yeah. But when they started kind of talking about it in a framework through his American films, I'm like, oh, I'm in good hands. But yeah, no, I mean, it's a film that for me, I just kind of love the fact that, as they kind of mentioned, this is an entire film without subtext. Like, it is unabashedly all about Eve. It's unabashedly, like this backstage sleazy musical that's also like, I've seen this so many times, but I somehow forget every time how vicious it is. Like, this is a nasty movie towards its characters. But yeah, I have like a deep affection for this movie, and watching this, it was really fascinating because I hadn't really dug into what Verhoeven has said about this. So there's definitely an odd dissonance that you get here. In the documentary, you have Kyle MacLachlan saying, this was meant to be hard drama. You have Berkeley, changing the narrative a little bit. You have Verhoeven and this bizarre book companion that I want really badly now.
Oh God, yeah. You gotta check it out. I think you can find it on eBay.
That's when you know
yeah.
You're in good hands with the movie, is when the director's like preemptively, maybe I should put out a companion book so that I can be sure that people get what I'm doing here.
Well, that was also around the time that Madonna's Sex book was coming out. So I mean, it would kind of fit into what these coffee table books that were what people were doing at the time. So it kind of it made sense, to have this kind of companion piece for the film, and then just kind of knowing and getting to kind of read Verhoeven's take on the process. And he goes a little bit into his his history, his work in the Netherlands. I mean, it's a fascinating read. So if you're really interested in kind of getting in his mindset, definitely check out Portrait of a Film.
There's an excellent episode of Documentary Now called like Live Cast Recording Co-op, and there's a line from one of the fake songs in that says, "The right erotic art means I'm sexual but smart," and that's what I think of constantly when I think of like the Madonna Sex book, and now when I think of the Showgirls book that Verhoeven did, which is so for me, Showgirls for me was I was doing a different podcast at the time. It was called Movie Dare, and our listeners would dare us to watch movies for whatever reason, and then like vote on it. And one of them was Showgirls, and I'd never seen it before because I was like, why would I do that? And it's almost funny because like afterwards I was like, I want to talk about this movie endlessly, but I don't want to listen to anyone talk about this movie because I feel like at the time I was like, when you've seen it, no one else can tell you what you just experienced. It's almost like The Matrix in that way. Like when Morpheus is describing The Matrix, like, no one can tell you what The Matrix is.
Yeah.
It's easier if I show you. Yeah.
And so that was my initial reaction. Since then, I've come to be more willing to like reach out and be like, okay, what did other people think of this? Because at the fore, you're just kind of like, this is an insane thing that I have seen, and like luckily this movie that you've made, this documentary, I actually found the way that you edited the different ideas that people had and kind of the different theses of the different speakers to be edifying and challenging, just like on its own. Just the way that you like juxtaposed what certain people were saying and put different views against each other, and then the fact that it's about Showgirls just makes it that much better. So I'm curious, like, what was your process for like finding the right people and then in the edit like finding the best way to tell this, because it's almost like an embarrassment of riches, I have to imagine.
I mean, definitely. When I started this, it was, I didn't set out to, I wasn't like, okay, like here's a documentary, like I'm going to make a documentary about Showgirls. It was mostly, I started to just try to figure out my own curiosity and try to dive a little bit deeper about why this strange movie, like still, kind of draws people like myself in. It's like, huge within the gay community, and, it's just like part of our lexicon. And I just wanted to kind of get a better understanding of it. So I just started reading everything that had been written about it. And, it's not hard to find because there isn't much. There's Adam Naiman's book, there's David Schmader's commentary track, Jeffrey Conway wrote a book of poems, there was some musicals. So I just through kind of scouring the internet and then trying to dig up all the initial reviews, like that's where I kind of started. And then once I reached out to everybody, they were all very excited, obviously, to talk about Showgirls because I felt like that they had shaped the conversation around it for the last 20, 25 years. And so I didn't want to make, kind of like the traditional behind the scenes making of, I was really inspired by like movies like Room 237 and Los Angeles Plays Itself. And I'm a television editor by trade, and I thought that this was kind of the perfect kind of exploration project, I guess, something that I could work on my own free time, on evenings, weekends, from my kitchen table laptop, and not have any sort of expectations, or it was mostly just like, let me figure out and see what's here. And so we didn't shoot a frame of video for this. I sent audio recording kit through FedEx to each contributor, and we logged on to Skype, kind of like how we're talking now, and I kind of talked them through miking themselves up, and we chatted about Showgirls for about 90 minutes, 2 hours with each person. And I had, like, with each person, I obviously based the interview around their own existing work around their own theories, their own writing. So I focused it on what they were going to bring to the film, and so it was kind of each one kind of had their own kind of personalized conversation, and from there I started editing each thread individually, and so I had these 20 to 15 threads, I guess you could say, vignettes, and then from there I kind of started trying to figuring out the best approach to it, because there's a lot that kind of needs to happen for something like this that isn't kind of your straightforward making of, so the editing was definitely a challenge, but once the funny part was, once I started watching all of Verhoeven's earlier works, then everything kind of felt like it started connecting, because all these strange little visual cues and motifs were connecting back to Showgirls. And to me, as I'm only, as an American, I was only familiar with the blockbusters, Starship Troopers, RoboCop, Total Recall, Basic Instinct, those films. And so when I saw all of the early work, I was like, oh my God, like, here are all these strange things that we I've never seen before in a film, and that stand out, that are uniquely Showgirls, and here they are kind of connecting back to his early work. And so I just that was when I kind of started to play around visually, like, okay, like I can tell this story in this other layer too,
I'm very glad that you brought up that Room 237 was a kind of an influence on this, because I mentioned that in the Slack channel that we have, to set up the show, and Michael Snydell, I don't know if you fully understood what I was talking about, but I feel vindicated, because I
good.
felt that, and I kind of love that, like, there's something very, like, pure and interesting about kind of just letting people talk and seeing images from films, specifically the subject, but especially in this case, your ability to kind of montage similar moments from every other Verhoeven film to show the through line.
Yeah, and like, I love Room 237, but so I liked that kind of format, I guess you could say, but I thought it would be interesting to kind of tackle something that is still controversial, that doesn't have isn't unanimously agreed as a masterpiece, and kind of hear everybody's opinions and butt them up next to each other and have this kind of honest conversation about this complicated film. I actually met with the director of Rodney Asher for coffee after I finished all the interviews and before I started editing, and just sent him an email. Adam Naiman actually connected us. He was like, oh, I can connect you with Rodney. And so we met for coffee one afternoon, and I just kind of wanted to pick his brain and just figure out how what's the best way to kind of approach this, because I knew there would be a lot of like legal issues that would come up, and he's like, basically the one takeaway I walked away with was, he was like, make your movie, like make the movie the way you want, and then after you're done, then that's when you kind of bring in the lawyers and start finessing things from their end. So that was incredibly helpful, that I was like, okay, here, like, I can just do my thing and start working, and then after we started submitting to festivals and we got into Tribeca, that's when after we already had a cut that was like accepted and approved, that's when the lawyer conversation started, so which was a lot of fun, but yeah, so it was incredibly helpful, and I'm a huge fan of his work.
I was curious too. I mean, just to speak of, I don't want to get into legalese or anything like that, but in the case of a lot of those Dutch films, they're not super easy to get anymore. I mean, does that make it more difficult that those, have all kinds of rights issues, or is it the Hollywood films that cause the most problems in that case?
Surprisingly, they all kind of have the same. Once you're dealing with fair use, I guess none of it really matters about like kind of who owns it. It's just whether you can make the argument and they can make the argument that it's connected and you need it to tell your story. And that, I mean, the main thesis, the main premise is, Showgirls is uniquely Verhoeven. It's connected to all of his work, and that, that's like my visual, argument for it. And so there were some areas where, I had to explain things, and, it was an incredibly tedious process because each shot has to be coded. Like I had a spreadsheet with like almost 1,000 different line items for every single cut in the film, and every time we changed it, who owns it, what description of it, and everything had to be green by the end before they could sign off on it.
Wow.
So yeah, it was crazy, but in some ways, I think it ultimately helped, in some areas too, just because, if the lawyers are kind of pushing back on certain scenes or certain, moments or arguments, it just kind of helps you to have someone be like, this needs to be a little bit stronger, in order to use these visually. And, I think ultimately it probably helps audience too,
Yeah, it's almost an interesting thing to have because, if you've ever been to a festival screening, someone will stand up at the end during the Q&A and say, now, why was her dress red? So this is a case where if someone asks, now why did you show this? You have like a full-on legal document.
Oh yeah.
To prove your work.
Line.
One thing I appreciated a lot, Jeffrey, was the fact that like you inserted something like Sharknado and talked about how, amidst all of this kind of reimagining of the purpose of this film, right? That it was meant to be campy, that it was meant to do all these things. You mentioned that it seems like, to my knowledge at least, limited as it may be, that no one has successfully created a cult film on purpose, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone's gone into these films with a sincere desire to make a movie that would stand the test of time and, is serious work. And so I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about, how important that argument was for you to kind of make and put out there, because so many times you think, oh, it should be super easy to make a cult movie. And it's like, no, like all of these people tried to just make a regular movie and it turned into, dog shit. And then it was afterwards that a lot of people kind of recontextualize some of the things that are happening, or, just looked at it from a different lens, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is one of those things that I think that is why a lot of us are, kind of like you said, like initiation, with films like this. It's like you might not have known about it, or it's until somebody tells you, or it's, like true camp is discovered, and I think that, you have films like Sharknado, which Jeffrey Sconce kind of brings up, and there's this, and that's like, I feel like a more recent trend, because he also kind of draws parallels to like Plan 9 from Outer Space is, kind of one of the early kind of cult, like so bad that it's good films. But yeah, it is one of those things that once you're in the presence of, what Susan Sontag described as failed seriousness, kind of true camp, then, that's something that it cannot be created on purpose by, like, I feel like by definition. So Showgirls, it definitely falls into that category. And, I get asked a lot, like, oh, is it, is camp films over? Are we done with them? Or, can they exist anymore? And it's like, no, they can definitely exist. But, it's just, you can't if you're setting out, if the goal is to make a camp or cult film, like you said, like you will fail. Like it's not going to have the same appeal, the same, the same. It's just like this feeling that you get. I don't know how you describe it. I mean, very similarly to The Room, I think, there's the response to that, I think, has been closest to the afterlife of Showgirls, even though like you cannot really kind of compare the actual films themselves. I mean, the productions were completely different, but I think the end result is very similar.
Mm-hmm. There was to that end, the last time I really remember seeing a film discussed as a possible like new camp classic was Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I was able to find on Slate.com the December 29th, 2010 article, apparently posted at 3:17 p.m. By Dennis Lim, and it says,
Dennis Lim.
Is Black Swan Darren Aronofsky's tawdry new thriller a work of camp?
Mm-hmm.
One of those things where I remember people talking about it, and it was just like, well, will it be? Like, is it going to be the thing? And the answer always seemed to be, no, it was too well received and too well respected. It can't be.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Like
that's funny.
It succeeded too much on its own terms. We can't like reclaim it because it just is what it is now.
Yeah. Did you? Yeah. Go ahead.
I think the newest one probably is going to be Jupiter Ascending if it wasn't so long, maybe.
Or Serenity.
Yeah, Serenity as well.
I've heard all those. Yeah, no. It was funny you mentioned Black Swan. I don't know if you guys saw that, but right before Black Swan came out, I did a mashup with Showgirls and Black Swan with the trailer, and so that was like kind of my first dipping my toes in the Showgirls pool, I guess you could say. But it was funny because it was right before Black Swan came out, and people were making all those kind of mashups, and I thought like as soon as the idea popped into my head, I was like, I think that looks fun. Let me think about what I could pair together, and there was a lot of hype for Black Swan, and I was like, here, it's Showgirls, and it works so perfectly. It got posted on a couple sites and stuff like that, and then people started. I saw a bunch of articles like you mentioned about is this camp, is this that, but I think that I agree. I think that wasn't it was nominated for Best Picture that year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
And, I have found your Showgirls Black Swan trailer mashup.
Yes, that's where you can find it.
We will be including a link to that when we put this out.
Yes, the first.
Well, Jeffrey, I'm really fascinated about Showgirls in a way because, in a way, I see it as a lot less. I'm editorializing here, and I go back and forth on this, but I see it as a little less malicious than something like The Room, in the sense that I think what is interesting to me about Showgirls is, for instance, it's still been contextualized in camp, instead of, all about Eve and Douglas Sirk and everything, and obviously there are clear times when Esterhaz, is that how you say it?
Yeah, yep.
That Esterhaz is like, he's taken from a lot of stuff from the past, but it is still really fascinating to me that the certain the certain performances and that almost like declarative dialogue, isn't more regularly linked back to like melodrama. Like just the fact that Mommy Dearest, for instance, or is it Mama? Anyways, like that it's linked to camp more than melodrama is just kind of. It's fascinating to me, and I am wondering if that is, the next step in a way, like whether it's totally justified or not. I kind of like that for the most part. You kind of do stay away from the camp aspect until a decent amount into the film. Like, you have someone like Adam and Jeffrey like trying to legitimately, discuss the formal aspects and, the possible intentionality.
Definitely, yeah, and I think that was, when I first read Adam's book, it's a fascinating read. I like blew through it one afternoon, and it blew my mind. And I think that was one of the things that you have to kind of establish early on, I think people going into it know, that if they haven't seen Showgirls, they're at least aware that it has this following. And, if they haven't tracked its afterlife, then, that part isn't going to be as surprising as hearing, some of these really interesting takes about it. And then what I also then wanted to do, I thought I wanted to still make sure that we were speaking to voices who could still speak critically about it, and so that was one thing that I didn't even really have to do. But Barbara Shulgasser Parker, she was kind of my dissenting voice critic, and she, before our interview, she went out, she knew who, I was talking to in the film, and she went in and watched like a lot of the other people's YouTube Q&As and stuff like that. And so she, without even kind of prompting her, she kind of pushed back on a lot of those things. And I loved kind of pairing, those scenes up where, you can have two, really smart, valid takes on this film, because, it's at the end of the day, it's like, those are the types of conversations we have about movies. It's not like, in something like Showgirls, it is one of those unique films where there isn't a definitive take or something that we've all decided, like, oh, okay, like this is good, this is bad, and we're done with it. Showgirls, the reason we're still talking about it is it is complex, it is it's problematic, it's amazing, it's hilarious, it's all these things, and I think people, like you said, they love watching it, and they love talking about it and debating it.
And I did love.
Did you approach Esterhaas and Verhoeven then for this, and did they decline?
No, I didn't reach out to anybody, because I knew that
okay.
I didn't want to make behind the scenes or making of, and
sure.
the way that I don't think that this format would apply to every film, but I think with something like Showgirls, where you do have this kind of complicated afterlife, I felt like their kind of job was done, in the sense, after the movie was over. And it was more about the relationship that we have to it and how it's changed over the years. And that's why, speaking to these contributors, they've shaped the conversation around Showgirls. And so I thought it was interesting to go back and hear what they had to say about it, when it first came out, and I wanted to make sure, to include their voices that way. But I'm not trying to kind of I didn't really want to try to pin people down or be like, well, what was your intent, or what was this? Because, clearly, like those defenses change over the years. And so that wasn't something I was interested in doing.
Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, I was going to say, one of the things that I liked most about this movie is how it kind of highlights the way that, like, someone could be like, oh, this movie is trash and, like, has all these problems. And then someone else can look at those same aspects and, like, genuinely find not just something good, but something, like, life-changing and positive and real in them.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's a thing that gets, if not overlooked, then at least trivialized a lot. And having that kind of first-person narrative perspective adds a lot to being able to see those differences in opinions and reads.
Yeah, that's the heart of it. You're probably talking about April Kidwell, and I thought she had I initially reached out to her because I knew she had a unique relationship with specifically the role of Nomi Malone and Elizabeth Berkley, because she played both her for these off-Broadway musicals in Saved by the Bell, the musical, and in Showgirls after that. And so I was like, oh, well, here's a perfect person to talk to. She's kind of inhibited both of these roles, and I would just love to kind of hear her take. And within the first kind of 20 minutes of our initial conversation, she just kind of like poured her heart and soul out, and it just was brought me to tears. And it's that that was, definitely one area that I wasn't really expecting to uncover, I guess, within the voices that I spoke with. But, that is the heart and soul of it.
Did you have an intention to dig into the Saved by the Bell stuff before other people brought it up?
Was there an intention to dig into it?
Yeah, to dig into Berkeley's past before.
Oh yeah, I mean, I grew up on Saved by the Bell. I mean, so that was that. I mean, I was probably still watching Saved by the Bell when Showgirls came out, in theaters. So
Sure.
and I think that is, I think, part of that's just an interesting part of like the allure of it, and the fascination was that here you have the first feature project out of this very successul children's television show is Showgirls, and that I think is interesting, and a lot of the theories around like the characters and the moments, I didn't, I mean, I obviously found those in the writing from the contributors, so I was drawn to those, and it was definitely something I wanted to explore in the film for sure.
It's curious because it seems like this was also Gina Gershon's real big break onto the scene as well. And so it is curious how they both ended up kind of taking different directions off of this one film, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and I think with Gina and with Kyle, they had more under their belt. They had other film, roles that they could kind of fall back on. I mean, Kyle was in Twin Peaks, and so I mean, I think when you do something like that, there is a certain amount of cred that I think that people might give you a pass. Whereas I don't think Berkeley got the pass, and I don't necessarily think that was fair. I mean, the performance is what the performance is, but the reason that we're talking about Showgirls is the performance, and it's brilliant. I mean, and I don't think that it would have the same effect or the last it's why people are drawn to the film.
Well, and I think it's fair that you also point out that it ultimately was Verhoeven pushing for that kind of style, right? It wasn't a choice by Elizabeth Berkley to be so above and beyond in this film necessarily. It was driven. Verhoeven at least owns up to the fact that was who was pushing her to act the way that she was.
Yeah, and I respect that he kind of came out and said that. I think that was around the 20-year mark for it. I mean, it would have probably been nicer for him to kind of own up to it sooner, but hey, better late than never. But yeah, he came out and said, like, if there's anyone to blame, it's me. I directed her that way. I thought that acting style would work for the film and what I was going for, and it obviously didn't work out the way I had envisioned it. So yeah, I mean, if you're a director and you're not getting what you want on set, then it's yeah. So I really appreciated his kind of taking ownership of it.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing, like you can imagine anyone else in this role doing these same things, and it would be weird, but wouldn't be as compulsively watchable. Like I can imagine, just going for like modern era people, like Mila Kunis or something doing that, just to go back to Black Swan for something.
Yeah.
And then, but like Berkeley just really delivers something crazy special. And it's
big swings.
Yes, and I mean, we began by talking about like she's this force of nature that for some reason, and it's pointed out in the documentary, like people just want to love her, they just want to be around her, and they can't give her up. And it is like because of how alien her actions are and her reactions. You almost can buy that, like, if this were a person who seemed normal, I don't think it would go over well when someone's like, do you need a place to stay? Because I'm really concerned about you.
Yeah, move in, please. Yeah, you know, and I'm not one of the first people to kind of point out. I mean, it's been written about that, you know, kind of like the parallels between, you know, Nomi herself and kind of, you know, it follows similarly to, you know, Berkeley's, you know, kind of storyline where, you know, this is her first break, you know, just same with Nomi, you know, this was, you know, her goal is to kind of to get on center stage at the Stardust, and here she is, you know, having this huge opportunity, and it didn't work out, I think, that the way anyone had hoped. And so yeah, I also wanted to have make sure we approached that with a lot of care and respect, and make sure that we did the role and the performance and did her justice.
I think one thing that yeah, sorry, Brian. Keep interrupting.
It's fine. I was just saying, like, that really comes off in this film, and I think that was one of the, like, they're walking into this. I was like, there's got to be a couple of things that they have to talk about, and one of them, like, I like love hearing everything I can about Joel Esterhaus, because I looked him up, and he's like a part of some. I should have looked it up before this, like Bulgarian, like, royalty, like his lineage is really weird.
Oh, yeah. I think he's Hungarian, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. He has an interesting kind of history. He was a journalist, so he was you know, that was where he kind of got his start. Was, I think he's back in, I think he's in Ohio right now. He kind of stopped screenwriting a long time ago, but yeah, you know, I mean, he was kind of like the notorious what was it? He sold the film, basically concept written on a cocktail napkin for $2 million. So one of the highest paid screenwriters in history, and I think that probably factored into the reviews and like the disgust of it, you know, just kind of knowing like how much he was paid, and then, you know, this is what we ended up with. And so I think that probably factored into the way in which, you know, critics had a kind of a field day with the film.
Right, because it was that insane period of time where, like, for some reason screenwriters were getting a lot of money, which I don't think they're doing anymore. But like, you know, Shane Black, Joe Esterhaus, was like, oh my God, this guy's got an idea. We're gonna buy it because it's gold. It's solid gold.
Yeah.
I was also glad that that your documentary didn't flinch away from, like, really digging into the ending of this movie. You know, as I was watching it, I'm like, I'm really enjoying this, but if they don't spend like a good 20 minutes talking about the rape that ends this movie, I'm just like gonna lose my mind. And so I was glad that, like, you know, unflinchingly, everyone is willing to like lean into that and be like, oh yeah, we have to talk about this.
Did any of you see the edited version first? I'm just curious, because that was my experience, and I only saw this version much later.
The VH1 version, like the one that they aired on TV?
There was an on-demand version that I saw that still cut out the rape.
Oh, wow.
I have no idea what channel it was now. Maybe it was just E on demand or something. Or VH1 on demand, I should say. I'm not sure.
No, the first time I watched this, I got a copy that was like, I don't know, on Amazon Prime or something, you know, but I had to rent it for money, and it was all in there. And I've heard about the VH1 version where they like put fake clothes over people.
Yeah, there's like these like floating bras on top of, you know, the scenes. There's just so much nudity throughout, like you can't really cut around it, so they just had to have these weird cartoonish
which I have to imagine is the version that my sister has seen, because
the one that replayed. Yeah, it had to be.
I did find it a little weird that the person doing repertory screenings said that like they would stop the movie and just like part. Like,
I mean, that was Schmader. Yeah, and he says he does get pushback from that. I mean, some people, there are showgirls purists out there who say you have to kind of experience it all, you know, if you're going to watch Showgirls. But I mean, he's been doing this he's been touring with the film, you know, for the last 25 years. I mean, the way he starts, I mean, he basically gives kind of has a 6-minute speech, that he'll talk, kind of introduce the film to his audience, and then he'll stop it along the way. So, and I think with that, he just skips over the rape scene. He tells the audience what they're about to see, and says why they're going to skip over it. But I think he thinks it's gratuitous, and we don't need to see it in order to kind of enjoy the film, or it's not something he wants to focus on. But that's one of the major issues that I think everybody has with the film.
Right, because you have this one character who is like a good person, and then for seemingly no reason, the movie just destroys her, and it's really one of the things that made me the most repelled but also interested in the movie is that as I was watching that, I thought what right does this movie have to suddenly pull this bullshit on me?
Mm-hmm.
And so it just was interesting to me because it almost seems like by cutting that out, you might be attempting to make the movie something that is explicitly not.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you have an opinion about that, or if you don't even want to share. But when you first saw the movie, what was your reaction to that? And in making this, did you absolutely know that it had to be a part of your documentary to talk about it?
Well, yeah, and especially since I had watched all of his other films, and just the surprising repetition that is a theme that, I'm not exaggerating. It's almost in every one of his films that there is some moment of sexual violence, and so that was surprising to me. And so it makes sense. That he made that decision for this film, based on what he him as a filmmaker. And so I wanted to explore that, and I felt like you have to have a conversation about that, because those are the conversations that we're having now. And one of the things I really appreciated about that scene, that moment, was afterwards, where I think that the kind of the prevailing wisdom is Nomi's big revenge sequence is meant to be empowering, and that's how certainly I viewed it for since I've been a fan of the film, and I think that's how most audiences kind of take it, and here's this great moment. But I found it so refreshing to hear Haley talk about this is actually just another case of just showcasing how there is no justice. If a woman's resorting to dealing out more pain and more violence and resorting to violence, then it just proves that there are no systems of justice in order to for her to get quote revenge. And so I just was really responded to that, and I wanted to make light of that because to showcase that, because that's true. We're still, there are massive protests going on this weekend. There justice is something that we don't have for all in this country, and I think it's interesting to show how quote justice is portrayed in films.
I think it's something interesting too. What dawned on me this time is that maybe if this was earlier, it might make more sense, and then it would fall into more of a rape revenge film framework. And I think that's what's especially strange about this is in the last 15 minutes, maybe.
It is,
it is. It's not an afterthought. It's still treated as a big moment in the film, but there is something, I think, extra. As Brian and you have both mentioned, there's something extra cruel about its place in the film after we've seen over and over, this, if someone gets in your way, step on them mentality.
Yeah, and Verhoeven said, in his book of essays, I think his defense of that scene was, if it just showcases Nomi. If she's willing to accept this, then she's willing to accept anything, and she would have lost her soul. So it's a device that he used in order to for her to reach this higher plane, and that is I think there's other ways he could have done that.
literally fridging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
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 I want to ask before you have to sign off. We got to talk about the name of the documentary. And I think having not seen the film and then seeing the film now, the title makes perfect sense, right? and you even kind of talk about it in your film, where I think it's actually Adam Naiman talks about kind of the little cherry on top of using that as her name in the film. And I just am curious how long it kind of was this a simple thing, or did it take a while to kind of get there? Because as a lot of things that seem so simple, sometimes there's a lot of indecision behind all of that, right?
The title came kind of towards the end of editing, but yeah, so that was one of the points in Adam Naiman's book, and he won't take credit for being the only person to talk about the pun in NOMI's name. It's a polyvalent pun, and so know me, know me, or know me. And it could be kind of seen in three different ways, and so it was just one of those things that you don't know me was something that I think it was just also part of the lexicon, with this queer people, we'll say it every once in a while, when Showgirls comes up, and so. But it was never that phrase was never used as a title for anything. And so, after, just kind of playing with a bunch of different things, and, I was out to dinner one night with friends, and it was just, it clicked, and, my husband said it, and and then I kind of dismissed it at first, and then once I started putting it in, I was like, oh, this actually makes sense. It makes perfect sense, because if you have an idea of Showgirls, then here you're going to hear all these different views on something that you might have thought you knew, and you don't, and so and maybe even at the end, you still don't know, you still don't know me. But I thought it was just a great way to kind of incorporate the name, and the process, the journey.
I remember that her name sticking out to me on my first watch. I was like, funny, you can't know her. And also, there is no her. And then there was another part of me that was like, it's so close, and sometimes it almost sounds like people are saying new me. And I was like, right, because she changed her name and she wanted to make a new me, so it was new me.
It was actually Joe Esterhaus's wife's name was Naomi, so I think he kind of named her after his wife too. So take that, for what it's worth.
I'm curious.
I think it's.
Oh, Michael, go ahead.
Go ahead, Brad. No, please.
No, I'm letting you go.
I was just going to say, I think it's brilliant for Verhoeven too, because so often his choices are brilliantly stupid. I think I'm trying to remember what review this is from Adam Naiman, but he says something along the lines of, it's so on the nose that it is the nose. And that's so much of Verhoeven's filmmaking. So I also just thought that was perfect for a movie about his film.
Nice.
I'm curious if there are any other movies that have struck you this deeply that you could see yourself diving into in this way, or is this like it? Was this your Everest and you've climbed it?
Well, I definitely want to keep doing things like this, and I'll kind of staying within the pop cultural landscape, I guess you could say. But I don't know if the next thing would dive deep into another film. This by far has been, one of the films that has been nearest and dearest throughout, my life. And, it was one of those things like the Jeffrey Conway, where he had this kind of beautiful moment of like, well, what am I going to do? Just watch this movie for the rest of my life? Like, I have to write about it. And it was one of those, I felt very, I understood that, because, here, I love this film, and, I wanted to kind of explore it in the way that, I wanted to have a conversation around it, like the type of conversations I would have with friends about it. And I think that is that was just great about this process. And so, yeah, I don't know if I would focus on another movie next, but definitely kind of keep the conversations about something else going.
By the way, love the level of commitment it takes to say, I'm not just going to write poetry about this movie. I'm going to write sestinas, which are notoriously one of the most formally difficult poems to write.
It is amazing if you have a chance to check them out. Each chapter in the book is the DVD. They said the name of the DVD chapter in Showgirls, so he titles it based on the DVD chapters, and then he basically finds these interesting ways to inhibit each scene, whether it's you're talking about the motifs in it, or he's literally like in the Versailles scene, he literally gets inside and runs the inner monologues to everybody in the conference room during that particular moment where she mispronounces Versailles. And it's just brilliant. It's just a brilliant take on it, and he's yeah. Stays.
I still say that jokingly to friends whenever they mispronounce a word. That's the staying power of this movie. It has those no matter how crazy it is, no matter how bananas it may be, it sinks its splinters into your brain, and you can never forget it, and it's just crazy. Anyone else have any questions or statements they would like to make before we let our esteemed guests go?
I don't think so, but I'm just glad that we're having more conversations about Showgirls.
I am. Truly. I want to go back and listen to the podcast that I did on my now defunct show about Showgirls, because I watched it 2 hours before recording, and I feel like there are certain points where you could feel my madness going. Just being like, what did I just watch? How is this a real thing? Someone saves her life after she was punching her car, and then she throws French fries and screams different places when she just asks where she's from. Truly magnificent. Anyway, Jeffrey McHale, thank you so much for joining us to talk about your film and Showgirls. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Truly lucky for you that you love Showgirls so much, because I imagine this would be exhausting otherwise. Yes. All right. Well, you have yourself a great time. Hopefully, quarantine and everything has been bearable for you. Bearable, yes. A strange time to be releasing a movie in. It is, yeah, but it's. I think that's one of the. It's funny because right when this all started, I got a lot of messages on social. Literally, it was week 1 of lockdown. People saying, "Release this movie now." It was almost like the demands, and I was like, "It's coming. Relax." But yeah, it's a good time to be to escape the horrors of reality and kind of dive into Showgirls. So everyone can watch it on June 9th. Woo. Available. So thanks, guys. Absolutely. Yep. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right. Bye. Bye. All right. Now it is just the 3 of us. Yep. That was fun. Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad we got to ask him about that. Oh my god. Showgirls. All right, yeah, so I think if it's good with y'all, we could just do the beginning and end real quick, and then we should be good to go. Yeah, sure. Cool. Unless there was anything else that y'all wanted to say beyond what we already talked about. I mean, did we want to talk about the movie overall, or did we want a little nutshell thing? I guess. Okay, I was just curious if we wanted positive on it. So. Yeah. Well, yeah. Bill, I am so happy that you'd never seen Showgirls before.
Of course. Yeah, no, that's. I mean, honestly, like without this podcast, I wouldn't see half the films I do. So I'm happy. I'm happy. I'm a happy man. I think Erica was not so happy. She yelled at Nomi about 5 different times at this film. She was like, "What the fuck is wrong with this woman?" I was just like, "I don't know. I've never seen this before."
You can't blame me for this.
I have to say, Emily's two of my favorite comments. I mean, once we were about 5 minutes, like the first time, she saw tits and bush,
Do
she
we
was
want to
like,
save this for the pod?
Aren't we on the pod?
We're still technically on the podcast, yes.
Okay.
Oh, should I not say this?
No, let's do it.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, I don't know. It's going to be a nightmare to edit this thing together anyway, so let's just
I'm sorry. Well, anyways, I just wanted to say, like, the first time there was nudity, there was full frontal nudity, Emily was like, oh, wow. And then, by 10 minutes later, it's like every other scene they're nude, so she didn't care. But the 2 things I love that she said is during the lap dance, by the end of it, Emily just goes, how'd she not pee a little doing that? And then the other thing she said is right after she sees her rehearsing the first time, she goes, "What is the matter with her?" which both seem like encapsulations of the entire movie.
I remember so yeah, my first time watching Showgirls, it was crazy. It was crazy watching it. And I just remember, and someone in this movie, You Don't Know Me, says, like, it's as though it's written by someone who's never had sex before. Like, it's like a 13-year-old's conception of what sex is. And that was my feeling watching it. I was like, there's no physical way these people, like, in these sex scenes are penetrating each other. And there's also no way that any of this feels good. It's just, it's so crazy that this is what is happening. And I was like, this is Paul Verhoeven. He's done a lot with sex before. I don't understand why this is how they chose to do this. Unless they're actively trying to make people repelled by the concept of physical intimacy.
I think Esther has too. I mean, like, his main claim to fame is erotic thrillers, which is amazing.
It's crazy. It's absolutely insane.
To make an actual critical point about the absurdity of, I don't know, this time I was definitely struck, and I recognize, given what Verhoeven and what Esther Ross has said, that this is very likely something I'm projecting, but I do find it significantly, very curious that the scenes between women are far more erotically charged than anything with men. Like, it's, I mean, Gershon, I didn't get to say this on the call, but I was thinking about this, that, there's a lot of people who feel like they've almost been forced into this film. But, someone like, I feel like Gershon, the guy who plays Al, Robert Davey, and the guy who plays Tony, Alan Rations. Those are like 3 guys who are so comfortable in this milieu. Like, there's nothing forced about their performance at all. They're just like so good at playing scumbags.
Get the ice.
Yes. And you can tell he's done it like hundreds of times, and I have to give him credit for giving that person an interior life that I don't at all want to know about.
An interior life that's made of nothing but like spider webs and spoiled cabbage. And I like, again, I think, we've talked about it already with the director and everything. I think it's, easy to say for me. Like, I really enjoyed watching You Don't Know Me. I found it very, like, illuminating in ways, mainly in the personal stories that the subjects bring. I don't think any of the information that I learned was new, but it is awesome to see a way of, like, seeing kind of personal essaying that is able to also write large some of the reasons that this movie stuck around, and the reasons that it stuck around not only in popular culture but also my brain. So yeah, I really liked You Don't Know Me, and it almost made me want to watch Showgirls again. I don't have the time to, and but I really thought like maybe I'll just skip the beach for like an extra 3 hours and watch Showgirls.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought that's what you were going to talk about when you were telling him about watching it with your family at the beach. I was like, oh no, did he watch this with them? Like,
no,
no.
I'm not about to watch. It's each week is always weird for me. I think the first time I ever went to the beach with my family while I was doing the podcast, the movie that we talked about was Clown. Everyone remembers that movie?
The comedy?
Yeah, with the comedy.
Yeah.
And so I watched that alone in my room, and everyone was like, oh, but it's a comedy, shouldn't we all watch it? And I was like, look, guys, I don't know what this thing is going to be like. And a big part of it involves ejaculating on the wrong person, so I feel like I made the right choice. I feel like the only...
There's
and then
a
everything else was like...
joke.
Everything else was like Hereditary, It Comes at Night. I think 1 year was Wonder Woman, and I was like, "Oh, thank God!" Like,
yeah, pretty much.
The movies we talk about while I'm at the beach are like, "Let's just kill myself."
Yep.
Oh boy.
Indeed. But so yeah, everyone else, did Bill? I'm especially curious because you must have had such a quick turnaround. Did you enjoy watching You Don't Know Me immediately after your first time ever watching Showgirls? Was it helpful to you?
It was definitely helpful, and it was interesting to basically get a 20-year breakdown of what's been happening with this film in the last 20 years, right? Like I've been not avoiding kind of the conversations about it because, I hadn't seen it, but just simply not paying a lot of attention to them. And so this kind of gave me it was almost like one of those I remember what is this show? It was so damn it, I can't remember, but it had like 5 or 6 seasons on like on Fox, and they did like a 5-minute recap of the previous 5 seasons. and it took 5 minutes, and it was like, what the fuck is this? And so that was kind of how I felt. I felt like, it luxuriates in kind of telling its own story for sure, but it definitely felt like I was cramming for some kind of test. I was like, okay, I got to know everything about Showgirls in the next hour and a half. Here we go. Let's do it. And so, that's kind of how it felt, but I enjoyed it immensely. And, like I said, it was invaluable because after seeing that film, I just wanted to talk. Like I mentioned it on the Slack channel a couple of times. Like, I hadn't seen this before. Please tell me I'm reading this right. Like, why is this such a shitty movie? And then it was like, oh no, yeah, it's a shitty movie. And then watch it again, and it's like, oh, okay, all right. And I was surprised by how much footage is in the documentary, so it felt like I was reliving it over again. So yeah, and all the parts that I wanted to as well. Just seeing her say Versace again, like multiple times was just beautiful.
Yeah, it is. I do like the one other thing I realized that we didn't get to talk about with Jeffrey is, it was interesting to kind of get that. I mean, it's not a coda in the film, but the way they handle Elizabeth Berkley and pushing back a little bit on the idea that this, as much as it was a pause in her career, the fact that she got to, host the Hollywood Cemetery screening and everything, that was kind of a bittersweet moment for, a film that, probably had not a great effect on her career for a while.
It's interesting. I'm pretty sure that I was listening to a podcast about Showgirls where someone actually talked about that Hollywood Forever screening where she was there. It's interesting that people who love Showgirls in a certain way grow to like feel kind of affection and like protectiveness over Elizabeth Berkley. I think that's one of its many. I can't even think of the right word. There's so many words that could possibly be used, but it's one of those things where, like, if you have an affection for this movie, you almost feel bad that it happened to someone. But it's also like it's so difficult to even describe what I'm trying to say right now. It's I don't know, like, if there's any other thing except for like a camp failure that can make you feel that way, because you're like, this person doesn't deserve like the crap they got for this movie being terrible, and I love it and I love them more because of it.
Sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of relationship to have with someone and their art, because usually when you really like someone's art and it means a lot to you, you can be like, oh, I'm so happy they made this. But this is like, you have to sort of feel bad for her because you know what it actually did to her career.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting looking at her career. She still made a shit ton of stuff after this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mentioned it during our interview, but I mean, her trajectory versus Gershon's trajectory are completely different, and it's interesting to kind of see that where Gershon kind of it seemed to. I don't want to put intelligence on it, but it seemed like she knew exactly what she was making, way ahead of anybody else. And I've gotten to sit down and talk with Gershon for some interviews and stuff like that, and she seems very hyper aware of what she is doing. And so the fact that she's been in some camp films after this and stuff like that kind of speaks towards the fact that she knew what she was getting herself into, whereas maybe Berkeley was not quite as aware, or not as adept at turning that kind of reaction into something that she could use, right?
It is fascinating to speak to. Jeffrey pointed out that Berkeley's. The documentary points out that, Berkeley's career trajectory is, in a way, very parallel to Nomi's trajectory. And like, if you want to bring that into it as well, you could also say that Gershon, she is always in a place of power, right? In this movie, she's entirely bulletproof. Even when her leg breaks, she still gets the final kind of, her moment has gravitas as much as it's a sleazy moment. And like, Bill, to specifically jump off what you were saying, I think it's really funny that, so 95 is Showgirls, 96 is Lana and the Wachowski sisters, Bound, and then 97 is Face Off.
Yeah.
So she like very much was fine with those roles that that almost feel like she has to pinball back and forth between different tones, and you have to have a self-awareness to do something like Killer Joe.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I got to interview her for.
Oh,
and
really?
yeah, and I got to interview just about everybody involved in that. But yeah, it was fascinating to see her kind of sweep into the room and she just kind of clapped her hands. She was like, all right, guys, we got about 20 minutes. Let's do this. And like, she was just into it, But yeah, it was fascinating to see her career trajectory. I've been aware of Gershon for a long time, and it was funny when she pops out of that volcano. I was like, I fucking recognize that woman. I was like, I don't recognize her this young, but I recognize her. And then I was like, who is that? And it finally clicked, and I was like, that movie. I was like, oh wow, this was her. I can't believe like this was really her big kind of breakout moment. So
yeah, Gina Gershon, when I first watched this movie, I was like, oh, she's the one who gets it. Like, she understands what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, this Showgirls. We cannot let this become an episode purely about Showgirls, because then it will go on for another 3 hours.
Sure. And yet we somehow never talked about the pool.
Right. yeah, well, that's so to me. That's
You talk about the palm tree lights when Erica saw that.
Seduction.
First of all, as far as like that is like he can only sleep with women who have been in Las Vegas for 2 days. Because I feel like that's the only point at which that level of neon in someone's backyard seems luxurious and awesome. But also, I sort of
It was so 90s.
I sort of was talking about the pool when I talked about like the anatomical impossibility of sex and how things must feel terrible. Like these are not scenes designed by people who understand how the human body works and how physical intimacy works. There's just and he
Sex
like
that
just
made
like
ER.
comes in pouring champagne and then just pours it on top of her and she's like, I'm into it.
Yeah, no.
And I think that it's things like this that make showgirls kind of stick out in your mind. And because you can't say like, oh, someone did that because they thought it was dumb, like in Sharknado. You know, like you don't know entirely what anyone was thinking when they were making Showgirls. You might know what you think what they thought they were thinking. You know, you might have concepts of what is going on, but you will never actually know.
It's kind of fascinating too that there's almost like a cottage industry for that midnight movie, in the sense that, like, you know, you have South by Southwest, you have Sunday, I mean, any festival, like they are particularly trying to pick things that they think will have cult appeal. And there's so many movies that seem built on, you know, whether it's if there's horrifying violence or, you know, this is super weird, or, you know, even going further and being like, this is a drug movie. and it's fascinating then. I mean, we've already mentioned it, but just the fact that exists and so few of those like ready-made cult movies, like, you know, like Mandy, I guess was the last one that really broke out, and we all had
Cheddar
our
Goblin.
Yes, Cheddar Goblin. But like, you know, that again, like, that still doesn't feel like Showgirls. It still doesn't feel like, you know, auteur visions, and like, I don't know. That whole thing is just fascinating to me, and it might be why I have such a deep affection for this type of thing, just because when I came to it, but also the weird like intangibility of this object that's been in my life for so long.
All right, I think we're good. We don't want to outrun the movie.
The intangible.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, I thought I had another thing to say, but now I cannot remember. So yeah, I think we're good. In that case, I will just run through the ending right now, and then we will do the opening.
Okay.
All right. So yeah, that's it. That is our interview with the director and our review and everything wrapped up together of You Don't Know Me, the documentary about Showgirls, as well as our thoughts on Showgirls. To an extent, there is still 100% a possibility that we may one day do a classic episode on Showgirls. If we had been thinking more clearly, we would have tried to do that. Instead of California Split, we would have done Showgirls and then You Don't Know Me. Just a perfect back-to-back double punch of doggy chow eating insanity.
Have you guys ever had doggy chow or
never
dog food of any kind?
I've never eaten dog food.
All right.
It's never
fine.
occurred to me to do something like that. There's a Rugrats episode about like the kids thinking that like if they eat a dog like food they will become a dog, but like even as delicious as it looks on commercials, the second you smell it, I feel like you're not into it. That's just my opinion. I don't know. Bill, have you eaten dog chow?
I've never eaten dog chow. I did tell Erica the other day that I have eaten some fish food, the flaky stuff. I was like, I wonder what this tastes like, and didn't taste that bad. I don't know.
Interesting. Okay, so yeah, no, none of us have eaten pet food.
No, I've had one kibble before, like a circle before, and on a dare. How does that not count?
It definitely counts.
Tasted it. You didn't like eat it, you know?
Okay.
No, I had one of the pebbles.
You had a single pebble.
Okay, well, but if someone
all
is
right,
like, have you ever eaten a spider? And you're like, yes, this one time I went to a foreign country and they fed me a single fried spider. You can say, yes, I ate a spider.
Okay, but I think that
Yeah, so you're suggesting that a single piece of kibble is akin to eating one of the spider legs?
no,
Is
I
that
would
what
say
you?
like one spider leg.
Fuck, I
Yes.
broke us.
Okay.
Yeah, no, because here's the thing. My dog, her food has like 3 different pieces within it. You know?
Huh?
It's got like the life source bits, and then it's got the circular thing, but it's got a little smaller blue thing in it that has like
Okay.
extra vitamins and nutrients.
Got
I
the
don't know where the
schmancy
flavor
dog
is.
food.
It is. Lana gets nothing but the best. Let's wrap up. Oh boy! All right, we are of course brought to you by Mubi. I cannot remember any of the things I'm supposed to say about Mubi now.
I had to re-record a plug because I did an old plug. Do you want me to bring it up for you, Brian, and tell you?
I'm pulling it up now. I think I can't find it. Please.
Yeah, instead of my 10-second plug, the new plug's about a minute.
Okay, here we go. So yes, just a reminder that we are brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. Don't forget that Mubi's new library feature allows you to watch all of the films that they have available. So make sure to check that out. And of course, you can get a free 30-day trial by going to mubi.com/filmstage. Again, that is mubi.com/filmstage to get 30 days of fantastic cinema for free. And of course, you can go to patreon.com/thefilmstage show to give us your money. Helps us to put on these shows, helps to support Michael Snydell during this hard time in his life. Okay.
I just said hi. I'm here.
All right, so that is it for today. Let's tell the fine people at home where you can be found between now and the next time. Let's start with Bill Graham.
Woo! You can find me on Twitter at CableBFG, and you can also find me mixing it up on the Slack channel.
All right, Michael Snydell.
You can find